The day my husband walked out, I wasn't even surprised. That's the part that still haunts me. 18 years of marriage, and when Robert finally packed his bags on that rainy Tuesday afternoon, all I felt was a hollow acceptance, like I'd been expecting this moment all along. Maybe I had. The signs had been there. The late nights at the office, the mysterious weekend conferences, the way he stopped looking at me during dinner. But when you've spent 5 years putting someone else's needs before your own, you sometimes forget to notice when your marriage is crumbling right in front of you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Emma, we need to talk. Those 4 words, the universal precursor to heartbreak. Robert stood in our kitchen, his overnight bag already packed by the door. I remember thinking how strange it was that he'd chosen to wear his blue tie, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. I was still wearing the faded sweatshirt and leggings I'd worn to Margaret's doctor's appointment earlier that day. "It's Jennifer," he said, eyes fixed somewhere above my left shoulder. I've fallen in love with her." Jennifer, his secretary. Of course it was Jennifer. 29, with a marketing degree, and that particular kind of effortless beauty that made me feel invisible whenever I'd visit Robert's office. I'd brought him lunch one day, 6 months earlier, and caught the way she'd looked at him. I knew that look. I used to look at Robert that way myself once. Caretaking changes you in ways you can't anticipate. When Margaret first got her diagnosis, early-stage Alzheimer's, Robert and I had sat at our dining room table and made plans, divided responsibilities. He would handle the finances, the logistics, the paperwork. I would manage the day-to-day, the doctor's appointments, the medications, the meals, the bathing. It seemed fair at the time. I was between jobs, having left my physical therapy practice when we moved to Oak Ridge for Robert's promotion. "It'll just be for a year or so," Robert had said, squeezing my hand across the table. "Mom's always loved you more than me anyway." That year stretched into 2, then 3, then 5 as Margaret's condition deteriorated more slowly than the doctors had initially predicted. A blessing and a curse, those extra years. A blessing because we got to keep her, the real her, for longer than we'd hoped. A curse because caretaker fatigue doesn't announce itself. It creeps in silently, settling into your bones until exhaustion becomes your baseline. I don't regret those years. Margaret had been more mother to me than my own had ever been. When my parents divorced during my sophomore year of college, it was Margaret who drove 6 hours to help me move out of my dorm when I couldn't afford to stay. It was Margaret who taught me to make her famous apple pie the first Thanksgiving I spent with the Wilsons. It was Margaret who had held my hand at the hospital after my second miscarriage and whispered, "Some women aren't meant to be mothers to children. They're meant to mother the world in different ways." So caring for her wasn't a burden. Not exactly. But it was all-consuming. The early mornings helping her choose outfits as she forgot which season it was. The afternoons answering the same questions over and over. The nights waking to check if she was wandering the house, confused about where she was. Throughout it all, Robert grew more distant. His days at the office grew longer. His weekend visits to his mother's house grew shorter. "You're so good with her," he'd say, watching me help Margaret with her physical therapy exercises. "I just get frustrated. You know how she always gets confused when I try to help." I didn't argue. It was easier to take on more than to fight about it. Easier to let him retreat into his work while I managed his mother's decline. I told myself it was just how some men coped with grief, by avoiding it altogether. Lisa, my best friend since college, saw it differently. "He's taking advantage of you," she said during one of our rare coffee dates at the Daily Grind. Margaret was having a good day, so Michael had agreed to stay with her for a few hours. When was the last time you did anything for yourself? Got a haircut? Went shopping? Had a full night's sleep? I stirred my latte, avoiding her eyes. That's not fair. He's working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat. The medical bills aren't paying themselves. Lisa's expression softened. I know you love Margaret, and I know you don't see what you're doing as a sacrifice. But from where I'm sitting, you've put your entire life on pause while Robert gets to keep living his. I'd brushed off her concern. Robert and I were a team, I'd insisted. We were just playing to our strengths. He was the breadwinner. I was the caretaker. Traditional, perhaps, but it worked for us. Except it didn't. Not really. Not if I'm being honest with myself. The truth I couldn't admit even to Lisa, was that somewhere between changing Margaret's sheets after an accident and tracking her medications in color-coded spreadsheets, I'd lost sight of myself. The Emma who had once run half marathons, who had her own physical therapy practice, who danced in the kitchen while making dinner. That woman had faded away so gradually, I hardly noticed her absence. 2 months before Robert left, Margaret had a lucid evening, one of her last. We were sitting on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. She reached for my hand, her paper-thin skin cool against mine. "You've given up too much for me," she said suddenly, her voice clearer than it had been in weeks. I shook my head. "I haven't given up anything that matters." Margaret's eyes, so like Robert's, that same deep brown, fixed on me with surprising clarity. "You have. I see it. Robert sees it too, though he won't admit it." "What do you mean?" She patted my hand. "When you give and give without keeping anything for yourself, people start to believe that's all you're good for. Giving. Even the people who should know better." I wanted to ask her more, to understand what she was trying to tell me, but the moment passed. The confusion returned to her eyes, and she was asking about dinner, forgetting we'd already eaten. The conversation slipped away, like so many things did with Margaret in those final months. But her words stayed with me, an unsettling splinter beneath my skin. 4 weeks later, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small, just family and close friends. Robert stood beside me at the gravesite, his hand in mine, both of us numb with grief. I thought, foolishly, that her death might bring us closer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That without the stress of caregiving, we might find our way back to each other. Instead, the opposite happened. With Margaret gone, the scaffolding that had been holding our marriage together collapsed entirely. Without her needs to focus on, the distance between Robert and me became impossible to ignore. We were strangers sharing a home, going through the motions of a relationship neither of us recognized anymore. 3 weeks after we buried his mother, Robert packed his bag and told me about Jennifer. "How long?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. He had the decency to look ashamed. 8 months. I wasn't looking for this to happen. 8 months. While I was helping his mother bathe, while I was managing her medications, while I was sitting by her bedside reading her favorite poems, my husband had been falling in love with someone else. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you waiting for your mother to die? The question came out sharper than I intended, edged with a bitterness I hadn't known I was harboring. Robert flinched. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Robert." He picked up his bag, shoulders slumped in a performance of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the house, the accounts. We can do this amicably." Amicably. As if there was anything amicable about abandoning your wife of 18 years after she'd spent half a decade caring for your dying mother. "Does Jennifer know?" I asked as he reached for the door handle. "Know what?" "That this is what you do. That you leave when things get hard. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might defend himself. Instead, he just shook his head and walked out, closing the door with a soft click that somehow hurt more than if he'd slammed it. I stood in our kitchen, my kitchen now, I supposed, for a long time after he left. The house felt cavernous around me, too big and too empty all at once. 5 years of caretaking, 18 years of marriage, and suddenly, abruptly, I was alone. I didn't cry. Not then. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and tried to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Robert Wilson, before I became Margaret's caretaker. It was harder than it should have been. The next morning, I woke to a text from Robert. Meeting with David Cooper on Thursday at 10 a.m. about Mom's will. Please be there. David Cooper had been the Wilson family attorney for decades. He'd handled our prenuptial agreement. Robert's idea, not mine. His family had old money, as Margaret used to say with a self-deprecating laugh. Drafted our wills, managed Margaret's affairs. I'd always liked him. He had kind eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that put people at ease. I texted back a simple, "I'll be there," then set my phone aside and stared at the ceiling. I had 3 days until the meeting. 3 days to figure out what came next. 3 days to start rebuilding the life I'd put on hold. I called Lisa first. "That absolute bastard," she said after I explained what had happened. "I'm coming over, right now, with wine and takeout." "You don't have to. Emma Wilson, for once in your life, let someone take care of you instead of the other way around." An hour later, Lisa was on my doorstep with Thai food and a bottle of Merlot. We sat on my living room floor, eating pad thai straight from the containers and drinking wine from coffee mugs because I couldn't remember where Robert had stored the wine glasses after our last dinner party. "What are you going to do now?" Lisa asked, refilling my mug. I shrugged. "Get a job, I guess. Find somewhere smaller to live. Start over." "You could fight for half of everything. 18 years, Em. And after everything you did for his mother." The wine had warmed my blood, loosened my tongue. "You know what's strange? I'm not even angry. Not really, I'm just tired. So tired of putting everyone else first, of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who sacrifices." Lisa reached across the takeout containers and squeezed my hand. "Then stop. It's your turn now. I don't even know where to start." "Thursday," Lisa said firmly. "Start on Thursday. Go to that meeting with David Cooper, hold your head high, and show Robert what he's losing." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced there was anything left of me for Robert to lose. The woman he'd married had disappeared long ago, replaced by someone whose identity had been whittled down to what she could do for others. If I was going to start over, I needed to remember who Emma Wilson was when she stood on her own. The next day, I made an appointment at Oak Ridge's best salon. 5 years of ponytails and messy buns had left my once shoulder-length brown hair limp and neglected. The stylist, a woman about my age with a platinum pixie cut, studied me with professional assessment. "What are we doing today?" she asked. What indeed? I stared at my reflection, trying to see past the dark circles under my eyes, the stress, lines around my mouth. "Something different," I said finally. "Something completely different." 3 hours later, I emerged with a chin-length bob, honey-colored highlights framing my face. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. I hadn't gone for fire engine red or a mohawk, but the woman in the mirror looked more put together, more present than I had in years. The following day, I visited the community center where I'd once volunteered, back when Robert and I first moved to Oak Ridge. Carol, the director, hugged me tightly when I walked in. "Emma, we heard about Margaret. I'm so sorry." I thanked her, accepting her condolences with the practiced grace I'd developed over the weeks since the funeral. "Actually, I said. I was wondering if you might need help with the physical therapy program. I know my license needs renewing, but I could assist until I get my paperwork in order. Carol's face lit up. Are you kidding? We've been using volunteers with first aid training since Dr. Maida left. Having someone with your background, even in an assistant capacity, would be incredible. We spent an hour discussing logistics, potential schedules, the patients she thought could benefit most from my experience. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. This was something I could do, something that was mine alone, separate from Robert and his family. By the time Thursday morning arrived, I felt more centered than I had since Robert's departure. Not healed, not by a long shot, but steadier. I chose my outfit carefully. A charcoal gray dress I'd bought years ago for professional conferences, a pair of low heels, Margaret's pearl earrings. Professional, dignified, but not trying too hard. The law offices of Cooper and Associates occupied the third floor of one of Oak Ridge's few historic buildings downtown. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area with dark wood paneling and leather furniture that managed to feel stately rather than stuffy. The receptionist, Valerie according to her nameplate, smiled warmly when I gave my name. They're already in the conference room, Mrs. Wilson. I'll show you the way. They? Not just David and Robert, then. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and followed Valerie down the hallway. The conference room door was heavy, solid, oak. Valerie knocked once, then pushed it open for me. Mrs. Wilson is here, she announced, stepping aside to let me enter. Robert sat at the far end of the conference table, dressed in one of his expensive suits, his expression unreadable. Next to him, of course, was Jennifer, looking uncomfortable in a conservative black dress that seemed at odds with her usual style. David Cooper stood when I entered, his familiar face creased with what looked like concern. And at the head of the table, to my complete surprise, sat Michael, Robert's older brother. Michael and Robert had been estranged for years, their relationship fractured by old family tensions and competing claims on Margaret's attention. I hadn't seen Michael since the funeral, where he and Robert had maintained a cold civility that fooled no one. Emma, David said warmly, coming around the table to greet me. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. I chose a chair across from Robert and Jennifer, nodding a greeting to Michael, who returned it with a thin smile. Now that we're all here, David began, returning to his seat, we can proceed with the reading of Margaret Wilson's last will and testament, as well as the details of the family trust. He opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. Before I begin, I want to clarify that Margaret made changes to her will and trust approximately 8 months ago. She was of sound mind at the time of these revisions, as certified by 2 independent physicians and witnessed by myself and my associate. 8 months ago. My eyes darted to Robert, whose expression had shifted from neutral to wary. 8 months ago, exactly when his affair with Jennifer had begun. Coincidence? I doubted it. The bulk of Margaret's estate, David continued, including the family home and its contents, her personal investments, and her share of Wilson Manufacturing, will be divided as follows. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the document before him. To her son, Robert James Wilson, Margaret leaves her collection of first edition books, her grandfather's pocket watch, and a sum of $50,000. Robert's head snapped. Up. That's it? His voice was tight with disbelief. David's expression remained professionally neutral. To her son, Michael Thomas Wilson, Margaret leaves her summer cottage in Vermont, her art collection, and a sum of $50,000. Michael nodded, his expression inscrutable. And to her daughter-in-law, Emma Catherine Wilson, David continued, his eyes meeting mine. Margaret leaves her family home in Oak Ridge, her jewelry collection, her personal investment portfolio, valued at approximately $1 $2 million, and her controlling interest in Wilson Manufacturing. The room went utterly silent. I stared at David, certain I had misheard. "That's not possible," Robert said, his voice rising. "There must be some mistake. Emma isn't even family by blood. The company has been in our family for generations." "My father?" "Your father left his share of the company to your mother when he died," David interrupted calmly. "It was hers to bequeath as she saw fit. But, furthermore," David continued, raising his voice slightly, "Margaret established a separate trust 8 months ago with Emma as both trustee and primary beneficiary. This trust contains funds specifically designated for the continuation of medical research into Alzheimer's treatments, to be administered at Emma's discretion." Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. She wasn't in her right mind. I'll contest it." David's expression hardened slightly. "I strongly advise against that course of action, Robert. As I mentioned, Margaret was thoroughly evaluated before making these changes. Additionally," he added, extracting another document from his portfolio, "she left a personal letter explaining her decisions. She asked that I read it aloud in the event that her wishes were questioned." Jennifer placed a restraining hand on Robert's arm, whispering something in his ear. He shook her off, but sank back into his chair, jaw clenched. "Go ahead," Michael said quietly. "Read it." David unfolded the letter, clearing his throat. "My dear family, if David is reading this letter, it means that someone, likely Robert, is upset about my decisions regarding my estate. I want to explain my reasoning, though I don't owe any of you an explanation. To my sons, I have loved you, both from the moment you were born, through all your triumphs and failures, your good decisions and your poor ones. I have tried to be fair in how I distributed the personal items that might hold sentimental value for each of you. The money, a modest sum for each, is equal because you are equally my children. But the company and the bulk of my estate I leave to Emma, not out of any desire to punish either of you, but because she has demonstrated the qualities I value most: loyalty, compassion, and integrity. Robert, you abandoned your wife to carry, a burden that should have been shared. You took her sacrifice for granted, used it to pursue your own happiness at her expense. When your father built this company, he did so with the understanding that wealth without character is meaningless. You have forgotten that lesson. Michael, while you have made peace with me in recent years, your absence during the early years of my illness hurt deeply. The occasional phone call and holiday visit don't compare to the daily care and companionship Emma provided. As for the Trust for Alzheimer's Research, this disease took much from me, but it also showed me who would stand by me when I had nothing left to give. Emma never wavered, not once. I make these decisions of sound mind and clear conscience. If you're angry, I understand. But know that my choices reflect not just what you deserve, but what I believe will preserve the values this family was built upon. With enduring love, Margaret Wilson. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Robert's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. Michael stared at his hands. Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear. I felt a curious lightness, as if something tight around my chest had suddenly loosened. It wasn't about the money, or the company, though the financial security was a relief I couldn't deny. It was the recognition. After years of invisible labor, of being taken for granted, Margaret had seen me, truly seen me. "Is there anything else?" Robert asked, his voice clipped. David closed his portfolio. "The documents will need to be signed, and there will be some administrative matters to address in the coming weeks. Emma, as the new majority shareholder of Wilson Manufacturing, you'll need to decide how you wish to proceed regarding your involvement with the company." I nodded, still processing everything I'd heard. I'll need some time. Of course, David said gently. There's no rush. Robert stood again, this time pulling Jennifer up with him. If we're done here, I have a meeting to get to. Without waiting for a response, he strode toward the door, Jennifer trailing behind him. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, turning back to look at me. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge what his mother's letter had laid bare. Instead, he simply said, "I'll have my things moved out of the house by the weekend," and left. Michael and I sat in awkward silence after they departed. We'd never been close. Our relationship defined primarily by our connections to Robert and Margaret, rather than any bond of our own. "I didn't know," he said finally, "about how much you did for her. Robert made it sound like he was handling everything, with some help from you." I gave him a sad smile. Robert has always been good at telling stories that cast him in the best light. Michael nodded, looking uncomfortable. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for not being there for Mom, but for not seeing what you were going through." "Thank you," I said simply. David cleared his throat. "Emma, if you'd like, to discuss next steps regarding the company and the trust, I'm available whenever you're ready. No pressure. Take all the time you need." I thanked him, signed the necessary documents, and left the office in a daze, the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was now possible, settling around my shoulders like an unfamiliar cloak. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "How did it go? Do I need to bring more wine?" I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the April sunshine warm on my face. For the first time in years, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Not happiness, not yet. The wound of Robert's betrayal was still too fresh for that, but possibility. The chance to reclaim the pieces of myself I'd set aside for so long. I texted back, "No wine needed. I'm taking myself to lunch at that new bistro downtown. Want to join? I have a story you won't believe." As I waited for her response, I caught my reflection in a store window. The new haircut, the straight shoulders, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of my mouth. I hardly recognized myself, but maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to become someone new, someone who put herself first for a change. Margaret's final gift hadn't been the money or the company. It had been permission to remember my own worth. The bistro was packed with the lunch crowd when Lisa arrived, slightly breathless and wide-eyed with curiosity. She spotted me at a corner table and weaved her way through the maze of diners, her expression shifting from concern to confusion as she took in my appearance. "You look different," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Good different. What happened at that meeting?" I took a sip of my water, organizing my thoughts. How could I possibly explain what had just transpired? The complete upheaval of everything I thought I knew about my place in the Wilson family? "Margaret left me everything," I said finally, the words still sounding surreal to my own ears. "The house, her investments, and—" I lowered my voice, aware of the crowded restaurant, controlling interest in Wilson Manufacturing. Lisa stared at me, momentarily speechless. "She what?" As the waiter approached, we paused our conversation to order a niçoise salad for Lisa, French onion soup for me. Once he departed, Lisa leaned forward, her voice hushed but urgent. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." So I did. I described walking into that conference room, seeing Robert with Jennifer by his side, the surprise of Michael's presence. I recounted David Cooper's calm recitation of Margaret's will, Robert's disbelief, and finally, the letter, Margaret's final message to her family. "She saw me, Lisa," I said, my voice catching slightly. "All those years when I thought no one was paying attention, when I felt invisible, Margaret was watching. She understood what I was giving up. Lisa reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Oh, Em, of course she did. Margaret adored you. But controlling interest in the company? I don't know the first thing about running Wilson Manufacturing. I've never even visited the factory floor. You don't have to run it yourself, Lisa pointed out. You can hire executives, maintain oversight without day-to-day involvement. I nodded, though the prospect felt overwhelming. Wilson Manufacturing employed over 200 people in Oak Ridge. It was the town's largest employer, a cornerstone of the local economy. The responsibility was daunting. What did Robert do when he found out? I described his cold anger, his abrupt departure with Jennifer in tow. He's moving the rest of his things out this weekend. Lisa's expression hardened. Good riddance. Though I'm surprised he didn't threaten to contest the will right there. Oh, he did, I replied, remembering Robert's indignation. But David was prepared for that. Margaret had documented everything, medical evaluations proving her mental competence, witnesses to her decision. She knew Robert would fight it. Our food arrived, and we ate in contemplative silence for a few minutes. The soup was rich and comforting, the melted Gruyere stretching in long strings as I spooned it up. Such a simple pleasure, I thought. Good meal in a nice restaurant? How long had it been since I'd done something like this for myself? So what happens now? Lisa asked finally. I set my spoon down. Honestly, I don't know. I need to meet with David again to understand all the legal aspects, and I should probably talk to the current CEO of Wilson Manufacturing, Thomas Reynolds, I think. Robert mentioned him a few times. But beyond all that, Lisa pressed, what do you want, Emma? Not what Margaret wanted for you, not what Robert expected, but what do you want? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For so long, my wants had been secondary, minor considerations pushed aside in favor of more pressing needs, Margaret's care, Robert's career, maintaining the facade of our perfect life. I began, then paused, searching for the right words. I want to matter, not just as a caretaker or a wife, but as myself. I want to build something that's mine. Lisa smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Then that's where you start. After lunch, I drove to Margaret's house. My house now, I supposed, though it still felt strange to think of it that way. The colonial-style home sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, its white exterior and black shutters a picture of traditional elegance. Margaret had lived there for over 40 years, raising her sons in its spacious rooms, hosting countless family gatherings on its wraparound porch. I hesitated at the front door, key in hand. I hadn't been back since the day after the funeral, when Robert and I had come to collect some personal items and make sure everything was secure. The thought of entering alone, knowing Margaret wouldn't be waiting inside with her gentle smile and warm embrace, made my chest tight with grief. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was cool and silent. Afternoon, sunlight streaming through the windows and dancing across the hardwood floors. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Margaret's reading glasses on the side table by her favorite armchair, a half-completed crossword puzzle beside them, a vase of dried hydrangeas on the mantel, harvested from her garden last summer when she'd still been able to tend it with minimal assistance. I moved through the rooms slowly, running my fingers along familiar surfaces, the smooth oak banister, the cool marble countertops in the kitchen, the soft throw blanket draped over the back of the sofa. So many memories lived within these walls. So much love and loss. In Margaret's study, I found myself drawn to her desk, a beautiful antique roll top that had belonged to her father. The surface was meticulously organized, pens in a crystal holder, notepads stacked neatly, a small silver frame containing a faded photograph of Margaret and her late husband on their wedding day. I opened the top drawer, not searching for anything specific, just wanting to feel closer to her somehow. Inside, I found a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. The cover was worn, the pages slightly yellowed with age. My first instinct was to close the drawer, to respect Margaret's privacy even in death. But something, intuition perhaps, made me pick it up instead. Opening to the first page, I found an inscription in Margaret's elegant handwriting. "For Emma, when the time comes. With all my love, Margaret." My hands trembled slightly as I turned to the next page. It was dated 5 years earlier, just after her diagnosis. "My dearest Emma," she had written, "if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have discovered what I've left for you. I'm sure you're confused, perhaps even overwhelmed by the responsibility I've placed on your shoulders. You never asked for any of this. Not the burden of my care, not the strain it put on your marriage, and certainly not the legacy I've now entrusted to you." I sank into Margaret's chair, unable to tear my eyes from the page. "I began this journal the day after my diagnosis. When Robert brought you to my house, and you both sat at my kitchen table, making plans for my care as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I saw something in your eyes that day, Emma. Not just compassion or duty, but a quiet strength that reminded me so much of myself at your age." Tears welled in my eyes as I continued reading. The journal was extensive, with entries spanning the 5 years of her illness. Some were short, just a few lines documenting a good day or a moment of clarity. Others were longer reflections on her life, her regrets, her hopes for her family after she was gone. One entry, dated about 10 months earlier, made my breath catch. "Robert came today, his 3rd visit this month. A record recently. He was distracted, checking his phone. Constantly. When it rang, he stepped outside to take the call. I watched through the window as his entire demeanor changed. His posture straightened, his voice dropped to that intimate tone I remember from when he first met Emma. Only he wasn't speaking to Emma. I'm not sure who this woman is, but I recognize the signs. My son is stepping away from his marriage, just as his father threatened to do during our difficult years. She had known. Long before I had allowed myself to acknowledge it, Margaret had seen the fractures in my marriage. Another entry from 8 months ago was even more telling. I met with David today to change my will. He was surprised by my decisions, especially regarding the company, but he didn't try to dissuade me. "Are you certain, Margaret?" he asked. I've never been more certain of anything. Emma has proven herself not just as a caretaker, but as someone with integrity, patience, and wisdom. Qualities sorely lacking in both my sons, if I'm being brutally honest. Robert takes after his father in all the wrong ways. The charm, the ambition, but also the selfishness, the willingness to discard people when they're no longer useful. I closed the journal, overwhelmed. Margaret hadn't just left me her estate on a whim or out of gratitude for my care. She had been watching, evaluating, making a deliberate choice about who she could trust with her legacy. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. She had seen something in me that I'd lost sight of myself: capability, strength, potential. Could I live up to that vision? Could I become the woman Margaret believed me to be? My phone buzzed with a text message, pulling me from my thoughts. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "Emma, this is Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Wilson Manufacturing. David Cooper gave me your number. I understand we should talk. Are you available tomorrow morning?" The real world, intruding on my moment of reflection. I texted back, suggesting we meet at the company offices at 10 a.m. Then, on impulse, I added, I'd appreciate a tour of the facility as well. If I was going to be the majority shareholder, I needed to understand what that meant beyond numbers on a balance sheet. I needed to see the people whose livelihoods were now, in some sense, my responsibility. I spent another hour at Margaret's house, exploring rooms I'd visited countless times but now saw with new eyes. The master bedroom with its elegant four-poster bed. The sunroom where Margaret had tended her orchids until her hands grew too unsteady. The guest room that might, in another life, have become a nursery for the children Robert and I never had. By the time I left, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the front lawn. I locked the door behind me, feeling different than when I'd arrived, more resolved somehow. Margaret had trusted me with her legacy. The least I could do was try to be worthy of that trust. That evening, as I prepared for bed in the house I'd shared with Robert, I found myself wondering what he was doing. Was he with Jennifer in some sleek downtown apartment? Was he angry, plotting ways to challenge the will despite David's warnings? Or was he, perhaps, feeling the first pangs of regret for what he'd thrown away? I was surprised to realize I didn't much care. The sharp pain of his betrayal had already begun to dull, overshadowed by the more pressing question of what came next for me. For the first time in years, I fell asleep thinking not about someone else's needs, but about my own future. The Wilson manufacturing headquarters occupied a renovated factory building on the outskirts of Oak Ridge. As I pulled into the visitors' parking space the next morning, I was struck by the contrast between the building's historic brick exterior and the modern glass entrance that had been added during a recent renovation. Old and new, tradition and innovation. It seemed an apt metaphor for the transition the company was about to undergo. I'd dressed carefully for the meeting. A navy pantsuit I'd found in the back of my closet, a silk blouse, low heels. Professional, but not trying too hard. My hair was styled in the new bob, and I'd applied makeup for the first time in weeks. Subtle, just enough to brighten my complexion and emphasize my eyes. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her expression politely curious. "May I help you?" "I'm Emma Wilson. I have an appointment with Thomas Reynolds." Her eyes widened slightly. News travels fast in small towns, but her professional demeanor remained intact. "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. Mr. Reynolds is expecting you. I'll let him know you're here." I took a seat in the lobby, noting the framed photographs on the walls documenting the company's history. Most featured Robert's father, James Wilson, the man who had transformed a small local manufacturer into a regional success story. A few showed Robert at various company events, his smile confident, his arm often around his father's shoulders. I wondered if my picture would someday hang on these walls, or if I would remain behind the scenes, a silent force guiding the company's future. "Mrs. Wilson?" A deep voice interrupted my thoughts. Thomas Reynolds stood before me, hand extended in greeting. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes behind rimless glasses. "Thank you for coming." I stood, shaking his hand firmly. "Please, call me Emma." He nodded, gesturing toward a hallway. "Let's talk in my office, and then I can show you around the facility." Reynolds' office was impressive. Corner location, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the production floor below, modern furnishings that complemented the building's industrial aesthetic. He waited until I was seated in one of the leather chairs, opposite his desk before taking his own seat. "I imagine this is a bit overwhelming," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "David Cooper briefed me on the situation, but I'd prefer to hear from you what your intentions are regarding the company." Direct and to the point. I appreciated that. "To be honest, Mr. Reynolds—" "Tom, please." "Tom, to be honest, I'm still processing everything myself. Until yesterday, I had no idea Margaret planned to leave me her share of the company." He nodded. "Margaret and I spoke regularly, even during her illness. She never mentioned her intentions specifically, but she often asked questions about the company's operations, our long-term strategies, employee welfare programs. In retrospect, I should have realized she was evaluating the company's health for some purpose." "She left me a journal," I said, surprising myself with the disclosure. She'd been planning this for quite some time, it seems. Tom leaned forward slightly. May I ask why you wanted to tour the facility today? Most shareholders, even majority ones, are content with quarterly reports and board meetings. I considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. Because I need to understand what I've been entrusted with. Margaret believed I was the right person to protect her legacy, but I can't do that without knowing what that legacy actually is. Not just in terms of financial assets, but the people whose livelihoods depend on this company. Something in his expression shifted. Approval, perhaps, or at least reassessment. The company is in good shape, he said. We've had steady growth for the past 5 years, expanded into new markets, maintained our quality standards while improving efficiency. The board is stable, though I expect Robert's departure will cause some temporary disruption. Robert's departure? Tom's eyebrows rose. You didn't know? He resigned this morning. Sent an email to the board announcing his immediate resignation as Vice President of Business Development. I hadn't known. The news shouldn't have surprised me. Of course, Robert wouldn't stay at a company where his authority had been undermined, where he would effectively have to answer to his estranged wife. But somehow, it still did. Wilson Manufacturing had been his life for as long as I'd known him, his connection to his father, his claim to the family legacy. I see, I said, keeping my voice steady. That was fast. Tom's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Robert has always preferred quick, dramatic exits to prolonged awkwardness. I couldn't help but laugh at that, a short, surprised sound that felt foreign in my throat. Yes, he certainly does. The moment of levity eased some of the tension between us. For the next hour, Tom walked me through the company's current projects, market position, and financial outlook. He was thorough without being condescending, answering my questions directly and admitting when he didn't have immediate answers. Ready for that tour? He asked when we'd covered the business basics. I nodded, standing to follow him out of the office. As we walked through the administrative section, I noticed employees watching curiously, whispering to each other as we passed. News of the ownership change had clearly spread, though I wondered how accurate the information was. The production floor was impressive, a vast space filled with state-of-the-art equipment, workers in safety gear moving with practiced efficiency between stations. Wilson Manufacturing specialized in precision components for medical devices, a niche market that had proven lucrative and resistant to economic downturns. Most of our employees have been with us for over a decade, Tom explained as we observed a woman skillfully operating a complex machine. We invest heavily in training and retention. Margaret was always adamant about that. She said a company is only as good as the people who show up every day to do the actual work. That sounded like Margaret. She had valued loyalty and expertise, recognizing that true skill took time to develop. It was one of the qualities I'd most admired about her, her ability to see people's potential and nurture it patiently. As we completed the tour and headed back toward the main entrance, I felt a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about money or ownership or even revenge against Robert. This was about honoring Margaret's vision, about ensuring that the company she and her husband had built continued to thrive and support the community it served. Thank you, Tom, I said as we reached the lobby. This has been extremely helpful. He nodded. The board meets next Wednesday. As majority shareholder, you're entitled to attend, of course. It might be a good opportunity to address any concerns they have about the transition. The thought of facing a room full of business executives, most of whom had probably known Robert for years, was intimidating. But I straightened my shoulders and nodded. I'll be there. As I drove home, my mind was buzzing with new information, possibilities, decisions to be made. Margaret hadn't just left me financial assets. She'd given me a purpose, a challenge, a chance to prove myself in ways I'd never imagined. When I arrived home, I found Robert's car in the driveway. My stomach tightened with apprehension as I parked beside it. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, not when I was still processing everything that had happened. I found him in our bedroom, our former bedroom, filling a suitcase with clothes from the closet. He looked up when I entered, his expression guarded. "I told you I'd be getting my things this weekend," he said, folding a sweater with methodical precision. "It's fine," I replied, keeping my distance. "I just got back from Wilson Manufacturing." His hand stilled momentarily. Mom never set foot in that factory, not once in 40 years. She had no idea what she was doing, giving you controlling interest. Margaret knew exactly what she was doing, I countered, keeping my voice calm. She left me a journal explaining her decisions. Robert's expression flickered with something. Surprise, perhaps, or doubt. A journal. Yes. She'd been planning this for months, Robert. Ever since she realized you were having an affair. He had the decency to look uncomfortable at that. "I resigned this morning," he said, changing the subject. "There's no way I could stay under the circumstances." "So I heard." He zipped the suitcase closed with a sharp gesture. "I suppose you've already met with Tom Reynolds, started making plans for your new role as company savior." The bitterness in his voice was palpable, but it didn't affect me, the way it might have even a few days earlier. I was beyond being wounded by Robert's barbs. "Actually, I spent most of my time learning about the company your parents built, the people who work there, the products they make, the values that guided Margaret's decisions. It's quite impressive." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You've changed," he said, surprise evident in his voice. I shrugged slightly. "I'm changing back, I think. Becoming myself again." He picked up his suitcase, hesitating as if he wanted to say something more. But whatever it was, he thought better of it. "I'll get the rest of my things tomorrow. Jennifer's waiting in the car." Of course she was. I stepped aside to let him pass, not trusting myself to speak again. As he reached the top of the stairs, however, I found my voice. "Robert." He paused, looking back at me. "I hope you'll be happy with Jennifer. I mean that." He seemed startled by the sincerity in my voice. Thank you." After he left, I stood in the bedroom we'd shared for 18 years, surrounded by the half-empty closet, the vacant spaces on the dresser where his cologne and watch case had stood. I should have felt sad, I thought. Instead, I felt lighter, as if I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for too long. My phone rang. Michael, to my surprise. We'd exchanged numbers after the will reading, but I hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Emma," he said when I answered, his voice tentative. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I assured him, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause, then, "I heard Robert resigned from the company. I wanted to make sure you were okay." The concern in his voice seemed genuine, which was unexpected given our historically distant relationship. "I'm fine," I said. "It's been an intense few days, but I'm okay." "Good, that's good." Another pause. "Look, I know we've never been close. That's on me as much as anyone. But Mom clearly trusted you, and I'd like to help if I can. With the company, I mean. I may not have been involved in the day-to-day operations, but I understand the industry, the market challenges." I hadn't expected this. An olive branch from Michael, a potential ally in the unfamiliar territory I now found myself navigating. "I'd appreciate that," I said carefully. "To be honest, I'm still figuring out what my role should be. I met with Tom Reynolds today, just to get a better understanding of the current situation." "Tom's good people," Michael confirmed. "Dad hired him fresh out of business school, mentored him personally. He knows the company inside and out. We talked for another 20 minutes, Michael offering insights about key board members, potential challenges, opportunities he thought the company should explore. By the time we ended the call, I had a much clearer picture of the political landscape I was entering, and a newfound appreciation for my brother-in-law's business acumen. "We should have dinner sometime," Michael suggested as we were saying goodbye. "My wife, Diane, has always liked you. We could discuss all this in more detail." "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself thinking about connections, how some weaken over time while others strengthen in unexpected ways. Robert and I had drifted apart so gradually I'd barely noticed until the distance between us was unbridgeable. Yet here was Michael, someone I'd known peripherally for years, suddenly becoming a potential friend and advisor. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already active with plans and possibilities. After coffee, I retreated to the spare bedroom. I'd converted to a home office years ago, when I'd still harbored hopes of restarting my physical therapy practice. The desk was dusty, the computer outdated, but it would serve my immediate needs. I spent the morning researching articles about Wilson Manufacturing, profiles of board members, industry trends, competitor analyses. I took notes, made lists of questions, sketched out potential scenarios for my involvement with the company. By noon, I had the beginnings of a plan, or at least a direction to explore. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Lunch. I want to hear how it's going with the company stuff." We met at a casual cafe near the community center where I'd inquired about volunteering. Over sandwiches and iced tea, I filled her in on my meeting with Tom, Robert's resignation, and Michael's unexpected outreach. "Sounds like the balance of power has definitely shifted," Lisa observed. "How does it feel, being on the other side of the equation?" I considered the question. Strange, empowering, terrifying. All of the above? She laughed. "That tracks. You're stepping into a whole new world." "That's just it," I said, leaning forward. "It doesn't feel entirely new. Challenging, yes, but also right, somehow. Like I'm picking up threads I put down years ago." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "You were always good at seeing the big picture, Em. Finding connections, understanding systems. That's what made you such an effective physical therapist. You didn't just treat symptoms, you looked for root causes, holistic solutions." Her words resonated with something I'd been feeling, but hadn't quite articulated. My caregiving for Margaret hadn't just been about compassion or duty. It had involved complex problem-solving, coordination, adaptation to changing circumstances. Skills that might serve me well in a business context. "I've been thinking about that volunteering position at the community center," I told her. "I'm still going to do it, but maybe just 2 days a week to start. I need to leave room for whatever comes next with Wilson Manufacturing." Lisa raised her glass in a small toast. To whatever comes next. As we finished our lunch, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in years, I was looking forward rather than just trying to make it through each day. Margaret's final gift hadn't just been financial security. It had been the opportunity to rediscover who I was and who I might become. That weekend, while Robert finished moving his belongings out of our house, I visited Margaret's home again. This time I brought cleaning supplies, fresh linens, a notepad for making lists. If I was going to move in, and I'd decided I would, once Robert was completely out of our shared house, I wanted to make it my own while still honoring Margaret's presence. Her journal had become a kind of guide for me, its pages filled with not just her thoughts about me and Robert, but her observations about life, about aging, about what truly matters in the end. One passage in particular had stayed with me. "The greatest mistake we make is believing we have infinite time to become the person we're meant to be. We don't. Every day we make choices that either move us closer to our authentic selves or further away. Emma has spent too many years moving away from hers, sacrificing her own journey for others. I hope my final gift to her will be the freedom to find her way back. As I stood in Margaret's kitchen, soon to be my kitchen, I felt her presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a gentle encouragement. A reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your path, to rebuild what was lost, to become the person you were always meant to be. The power had shifted, not just legally or financially, but within me. I was no longer the woman who had stood frozen in her kitchen as her husband walked out the door. I was becoming someone new, or perhaps someone I'd been all along, waiting for the chance to emerge. The morning of the board meeting arrived with an unexpected sense of clarity. I woke before my alarm, the pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains of what had once been the guest bedroom in Robert's and my house. Soon, I would complete my move to Margaret's home, but for now, this transitional space served as a fitting backdrop for the day ahead, neither entirely my past nor fully my future. I dressed with deliberate care. A charcoal gray suit I'd purchased years ago for professional conferences, a silk blouse in deep burgundy, the pearl earrings Margaret had given me for my 40th birthday. Professional, but not severe. Confident, without being aggressive. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with steady eyes, her posture straight, her new bob framing a face that appeared somehow younger than it had just weeks before. "You can do this," I told my reflection, practicing the words I'd rehearsed with Lisa the evening before. "You belong in that boardroom." The drive to Wilson Manufacturing headquarters gave me time to mentally review my strategy. After extensive conversations with Michael and Tom Reynolds, I'd decided on a measured approach for this first meeting, primarily listening and observing, asking thoughtful questions, establishing myself as a serious presence without making immediate demands for change. The board members would be wary, perhaps even hostile. My job today was not to win them over, but to demonstrate that I couldn't be easily dismissed. The parking lot was nearly full when I arrived. Executives' luxury vehicles lined up in their designated spaces. I pulled my modest sedan into the spot marked Visitor and took a moment to steady my breathing before exiting the car. The weight of what I was about to do, step into a room full of experienced business leaders as their new majority shareholder, threatened to overwhelm me. But then I remembered Margaret's words from her journal. True confidence isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about being unafraid to ask the right questions. The receptionist recognized me immediately this time, greeting me with a respectful, "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson," and directing me to the executive conference room on the 4th floor. As the elevator ascended, I mentally repeated the mantra Lisa had given me. "You are not an imposter. You are exactly where you're meant to be." The conference room doors were closed when I arrived, though the low murmur of voices from within indicated the meeting hadn't yet begun. I checked my watch. 8:50 a.m., 10 minutes before the scheduled start. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The conversation ceased immediately as 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The room was dominated by a massive oak table, around which sat 7 men and 1 woman, all in variations of corporate attire, all regarding me with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Tom Reynolds rose from his seat at the head of the table. "Mrs. Wilson, welcome. We were just getting settled." He gestured to an empty chair to his right. "Please, join us." As I crossed the room, I was acutely aware of being evaluated, judged, measured against whatever expectations these people had formed. I held my head high, making brief eye contact with each person I passed, offering a small, confident smile. By the time I reached my seat, I could sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps a recalibration of their initial assumptions. "Allow me to make introductions," Tom said, proceeding to name each board member. Along with their role, James Hartley, Chief Financial Officer, Diana Chen, Head of Research and Development, William Foster, Operations Director, and 4 external board members from various industries whose connections to the company dated back to Robert's father's era. I shook hands with each, noting their grips, their expressions, filing away impressions for later consideration. William Foster's handshake was particularly telling, barely touching my fingers, his eyes not meeting mine, his body language screaming discomfort. I marked him as the most likely to cause problems. "Now that we're all acquainted," Tom said, returning to his seat, "let's begin with the quarterly financial review." "James?" The CFO launched into his presentation, a detailed analysis of the company's performance over the past 3 months. I listened intently, asking occasional questions for clarification, but otherwise focusing on absorbing the information. The company was performing well overall, with strong growth in their cardiac device components division and some challenges in neurology equipment parts. As the meeting progressed through departmental updates, strategic planning discussions, and operational concerns, I observed the group dynamics with interest. Tom was clearly respected, his leadership style collaborative but decisive. Diana Chen was brilliant but tended to speak in technical terms that sometimes lost her audience. William Foster, as I'd suspected, was the most resistant to my presence, directing his comments exclusively to other board members and referring to Mrs. Wilson's unexpected involvement with poorly disguised disdain. When the agenda turned to new business, Tom cleared his throat. "Before we continue, I believe it would be appropriate to address the change in ownership structure. Mrs. Wilson, would you like to say a few words?" All eyes turned to me once again. This was the moment I'd prepared for, the opportunity to establish my position without appearing threatening or naive. "Thank you, Tom," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "First, I want to express my appreciation for your warm welcome today." A gentle acknowledgement of the fiction that they'd all been perfectly cordial. "As you know, Margaret Wilson's decision to leave me controlling interest in the company came as a surprise to everyone, myself included." I paused, making eye contact with each person around the table before continuing. "I want to be clear about my intentions moving forward. I have tremendous respect for the company that James and Margaret Wilson built, and for the expertise each of you brings to its continued success. My goal is not to disrupt operations or impose uninformed changes. Rather, I see my role as ensuring that Wilson Manufacturing remains true to the values upon which it was founded while adapting to meet future challenges." William Foster shifted in his seat, his expression skeptical. "And what exactly would you know about those values, Mrs. Wilson? With all due respect, caring for an elderly woman, while admirable, hardly qualifies you to understand the complexities of running a precision manufacturing business." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Around the table, several board members looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to be waiting for my response with interest. I met Foster's gaze directly. "You raise a fair question, Mr. Foster. I don't have a background in manufacturing or business management. What I do have is 5 years of close conversation with Margaret Wilson about what mattered most to her, the legacy she wanted this company to maintain." I opened the leather portfolio I'd brought, removing a single sheet of paper. Margaret believed in 3 core principles: exceptional quality, ethical treatment of employees, and responsible innovation. These aren't just platitudes to me. They're commitments I intend to honor. As for the technical aspects of the business, that's why Wilson Manufacturing has expert leaders like yourself and the rest of this board. My role isn't to tell you how to manufacture precision components. It's to ensure that the company's direction aligns with Margaret's vision. Foster seemed taken aback by my measured response, clearly having expected either defensiveness or naivety. Before he could formulate a reply, Diana Chen spoke up. "I worked closely with Margaret on our employee development programs," she said, her quiet voice carrying surprising authority. She was particularly invested in our engineering scholarship initiative for local students. Were those the kinds of programs she discussed with you? I nodded, grateful for the opening. Absolutely. Margaret spoke often about creating pathways for talented young people, especially those who might not otherwise have access to careers in advanced manufacturing. She believed the company's future depended on cultivating new talent within the community. Diana smiled slightly, a small gesture of approval that felt like a significant victory. For the next 20 minutes, I engaged in a thoughtful discussion with the board, outlining my understanding of Margaret's priorities while asking informed questions about current initiatives. I'd done my homework, reviewing years of annual reports and press releases, and it showed. By the time Tom suggested we move on to the next agenda item, I could sense a subtle shift in the room's energy. Not embrace, certainly, but perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement that I wasn't the clueless interloper some had anticipated. As the meeting concluded 2 hours later, Tom approached me while the others gathered their materials. "You handled that well," he said quietly. Foster was out of line. I shrugged. He won't be the last person to underestimate me. Tom's mouth quirked in a half smile. "I don't think anyone in that room is underestimating you now, Emma. Would you have time for lunch? There are some matters we should discuss privately." We settled on a quiet restaurant a few blocks from the office, an upscale bistro where the booth seating ensured privacy for business conversations. Once we'd ordered, a niçoise salad for me, grilled salmon for Tom, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "There's something you should know. Robert has been reaching out to several board members individually, suggesting that Margaret's mental state was compromised when she made her final will. He's laying groundwork for a legal challenge." I wasn't surprised, though hearing it confirmed sent a flash of anger through me. David Cooper anticipated this. Margaret underwent thorough cognitive assessments before making those changes. Her doctors were very clear about her mental capacity. Tom nodded. "That's reassuring. Still, you should be prepared for some turbulence." Robert built strong relationships with several board members over the years, particularly Foster. They won't openly defy you as majority shareholder, but they could make implementation of any changes difficult. "I appreciate the warning," I said, taking a sip of water. "May I ask where you stand in all this? You worked closely with Robert. I imagine this situation puts you in an awkward position." His expression was thoughtful. "I respected Robert's business acumen, but I've been with Wilson Manufacturing for 15 years. I've seen leadership styles come and go. James Wilson built this company on integrity and innovation. Margaret preserved that legacy. My loyalty is to those principles, not to any individual." It was a diplomatic answer, but something in his direct gaze suggested sincerity. I decided to take a calculated risk. "Tom, I need an ally who understands this business from the inside. Someone who can help me navigate these waters without being undermined by Robert's supporters. Is that someone you?" He considered the question, taking his time before responding. "Margaret called me the day after she changed her will. She didn't tell me her specific plans, but she asked me a question I found unusual at the time. She asked whether I believed a company should be run by those who inherit positions or by those who earn them through merit and commitment." I smiled slightly. "That sounds like Margaret, always testing, evaluating." "Yes, I told her I believed in merit and commitment. She seemed pleased with that answer." He met my eyes directly. "I stand by that belief, Emma. If you're committed to preserving what makes Wilson Manufacturing special while helping it grow and adapt, then yes, I'm your ally." Relief washed through me. Having the CEO's support would make all the difference in establishing my role at the company. Our food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As we ate, Tom filled me in on several ongoing projects, speaking more freely now that we'd established a tentative alliance. I listened carefully, asking questions that revealed both my limitations and my capacity to learn quickly. "There's one more thing," Tom said as we finished our meal. "The Peterson acquisition." Peterson Medical Devices? I saw a reference to that in last quarter's minutes, but the details were vague. He nodded. "It's been Robert's pet project for the past year. Peterson has developed a revolutionary cardiac monitoring system that would pair perfectly with our components. Acquiring them would position Wilson Manufacturing at the forefront of integrated medical solutions rather than just component manufacturing." "That sounds promising. What's the issue?" Tom's expression grew serious. "The acquisition is expensive. It would require leveraging company assets in a way we haven't done before. Robert was pushing hard for it, but Margaret was hesitant. She worried about taking on too much debt and potentially having to cut corners on quality or employee benefits to meet financial targets. I considered this information carefully. "And where do you stand?" "I see potential in the acquisition, but I share Margaret's concerns about the financial risk." Robert was less cautious in his approach. The implied criticism wasn't lost on me. "The board seems divided on this?" "Yes. Foster and 2 others are firmly in Robert's camp, pushing to move forward aggressively. Diana and I have advocated for a more measured approach. The remaining members have been on the fence." I nodded slowly. "And now they're all waiting to see which way I'll lean." "Exactly. It's your first major decision as controlling shareholder. It will set the tone for your leadership." No pressure, I thought wryly. Aloud, I said, "I'll need to review all the documentation, understand the full implications before taking a position." Tom looked pleased with my response. "I can have everything sent to you this afternoon. Take your time reviewing it. The final vote isn't scheduled until next month's meeting." By the time we parted ways outside the restaurant, I felt both energized and exhausted. The morning's board meeting had been a crucial first step in establishing my presence at Wilson Manufacturing, but it was clear that navigating the company's politics would require all my attention and strategic thinking. That evening, I called Michael to fill him in on the day's events. He listened attentively as I described the board meeting, Tom's warning about Robert's maneuvers, and the looming decision about the Peterson acquisition. "Robert always did have a thing for bold moves," Michael commented when I finished. "Dad was more conservative, building slowly and sustainably. Mom understood that approach better than either of us sons, I think." "That's the impression I got from her journal," I agreed. "She valued stability and quality over rapid expansion." "The Peterson deal isn't necessarily wrong," Michael clarified. "It could be transformative for the company. But Robert's timeline and approach were typically aggressive. He wanted to move fast, worry about the details later." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I don't know enough yet to make an informed decision. I feel like I'm playing catch-up on years of business context." "That's because you are," Michael said simply. "Listen, Emma, there's something I've been thinking about since our talk the other day. What if I came back to Wilson Manufacturing? Not in Robert's role, obviously, but as a consultant on strategic initiatives. I could help you navigate some of these decisions, provide historical context that Tom might not have." I hadn't expected this offer. Michael had deliberately kept his distance from the family business for years, pursuing his own ventures in a related but distinct industry. His return would signal a significant shift in the family dynamics. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I thought you were happy with your consulting firm." There was a pause before he responded. "I've been rethinking a lot of things since Mom died. My relationship with her, with Robert, with the company Dad built. I stayed away partly because of the tension with Robert, but also because I thought I needed to forge my own path. Now I'm wondering if that was just pride." The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. In all the years I'd known Michael, he'd always maintained a certain emotional distance, much like his brother in that regard. I think Margaret would be pleased, I said carefully. Having another Wilson involved in the company again. Not just any Wilson, he replied, a smile evident in his voice. The one who actually paid attention when Dad explained manufacturing processes at dinner. I laughed. You know, that might be exactly what I need. Someone who understands both the business side and the Wilson family history. Then it's settled. I'll draw up a consulting proposal and send it over tomorrow. We can discuss terms that work for both of us. After ending the call, I sat in what had once been Margaret's sunroom, now filled with moving boxes containing my belongings. The house still held Margaret's presence in 1,000 subtle ways. Her choice of paint colors, the arrangement of furniture, the well-tended orchids that somehow continued to thrive despite her absence. Yet it was gradually becoming mine as well, a space where I could reimagine my life beyond the boundaries of wife and caretaker. The following week passed in a blur of activity. During the day, I immersed myself in learning about Wilson manufacturing, reviewing financial statements, touring production facilities, meeting with department heads. Evenings were spent alternating between settling into Margaret's house and volunteering at the community center's physical therapy program. True to his word, Michael prepared a detailed consulting proposal outlining how he could support the company's strategic planning while helping me understand the industry context. The board approved it with minimal resistance, perhaps recognizing the value of having a Wilson family member involved again, even in a limited capacity. Robert, meanwhile, maintained a conspicuous silence. According to Tom, he had stopped personally contacting board members after being informed that any challenge to Margaret's will would face substantial legal obstacles. The sudden cessation of his efforts made me uneasy. Robert wasn't one to admit defeat easily. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was regrouping, planning a different approach. My suspicions were confirmed 10 days after the board meeting. I was reviewing documents in my newly established home office when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable in a conservative dress that seemed at odds with her usual style. I hesitated, then opened the door. "Jennifer, this is unexpected." She fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "I know. I'm sorry to come by unannounced. Could we talk? It's important." Curiosity won out over caution. I invited her in, leading her to the living room where we sat on opposite ends of Margaret's floral sofa. The awkwardness between us was palpable. This woman had been having an affair with my husband for months while I cared for his dying mother. "Robert doesn't know." "I'm here," she began, confirming my unspoken question. He'd be furious if he found out. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I wanted to warn you," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Robert is planning something. He's been meeting with investors, trying to raise enough capital to make a competing offer for Peterson Medical Devices." I felt a chill. If Robert succeeded, he could potentially undermine one of Wilson Manufacturing's most significant growth opportunities. "Why are you telling me this?" Jennifer looked down at her hands. "Because I made a mistake. Getting involved with Robert? I mean, I don't know what I thought, that he was this dynamic, misunderstood businessman whose wife didn't appreciate him." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Classic cliché, right? The secretary falls for the boss's sob story." "And now?" I prompted when she fell silent. "Now I see the real Robert, the one who talks about you like you're an obstacle to be removed, the one who's willing to damage his family's company out of spite." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or understanding. I just thought you should know what you're up against." I studied her face, searching for signs of deception. Finding none, I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. May I ask why you're still with him, if you've seen this side of him?" A flash of something, shame perhaps, crossed her features. I'm not. As of yesterday. That's another reason he can't know I came here. I ended things after overhearing his conversation with the investors. He didn't take it well. That explained her obvious nervousness. Do you need help? Somewhere to stay? She looked startled by the offer. No, I have a friend I'm staying with. I just wanted to make sure you knew what was happening. You were good to Margaret. She spoke highly of you the few times I met her at company events. After Jennifer left, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing this unexpected development. If what she'd said was true, and my instinct told me it was, Robert was moving from undermining my position at Wilson Manufacturing to actively competing against the company's interests. It was a level of vindictiveness that surprised even me. I called Tom immediately, relaying Jennifer's information without revealing its source. He listened gravely, then sighed. It's possible, he confirmed. Peterson is privately held, and while we've been in exclusive negotiations, there's no signed agreement yet. If Robert could secure enough funding and make a more attractive offer, he could theoretically outbid us. How likely is he to succeed? Honestly, not very. The funding required is substantial, and Robert's reputation in the industry isn't what it once was. Still, we can't afford to dismiss the threat entirely. What do you recommend? There was a brief pause as Tom considered. We accelerate our timeline. The board was planning to vote on the acquisition next month, but we could move it up to next week if we're prepared to make a decision. This put me in a difficult position. I was still reviewing the acquisition materials, still forming my opinion on whether this was the right move for the company. Accelerating the timeline meant making that decision with less information than I'd hoped to have. Let me think about it, I told Tom. I'll get back to you tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced Margaret's house, my house now, thinking through my options. On one hand, rushing the Peterson acquisition to block Robert seemed reactive, potentially reckless. On the other hand, if the acquisition truly represented Wilson Manufacturing's best path forward, losing it to Robert's spite would be devastating for the company. Around midnight, I found myself in Margaret's study, drawn once again to her journal. Flipping through its pages, I searched for guidance, some indication of what she would do in my position. Toward the back, I found an entry from just 2 months, before her death. Business decisions like personal ones should never be made from a place of fear or spite. James taught me that. When our competitors tried to pressure us into cutting corners to meet price points, he refused. We'll compete on quality and innovation, he said, not by becoming something we're not. We nearly went bankrupt that year, but the following year, when defects were discovered in our competitors' products, our reputation for unwavering quality saved us. Sometimes the right decision doesn't look like the safe one. I closed the journal, a sense of clarity settling over me. Margaret wouldn't want me making decisions based on Robert's threats. She would want me to evaluate the Peterson acquisition on its merits, considering what was best for Wilson Manufacturing's long-term health, not just its immediate competitive position. The next morning, I called Michael and asked him to meet me at a local cafe. Over coffee, I shared Jennifer's warning and Tom's suggestion to accelerate the acquisition timeline. What's your gut telling you about Peterson? Michael asked after hearing me out. Setting aside Robert's interference, do you think it's the right move? I appreciated that he asked for my opinion first, rather than immediately offering his own. I see the potential, I said slowly. The integration of their monitoring technology with our components could create something truly innovative. But the financial risk is significant, especially if we move at the accelerated pace Tom's suggesting. Michael nodded thoughtfully. The challenge with acquisitions is that they often look better on paper than in execution. Culture clashes, integration issues, hidden liabilities, all of these can turn a promising deal sour. So you're against it? Not necessarily, I'm saying that if we do this, we need to be thorough, not rushed. Robert's potential competing bid changes the timeline, but it shouldn't change our standards for due diligence. His use of "we" wasn't lost on me. In just a week, Michael had fully committed to helping navigate this situation, his initial hesitation replaced by engaged involvement. What if, I suggested, we proposed a third option, not rushing to acquire Peterson immediately, but not walking away either? What if we negotiated a strategic partnership instead, something that could potentially lead to acquisition down the road, but would give us time to work together, evaluate compatibility, and spread the financial commitment over a longer period? Michael's eyes lit up. A staged approach. It's less flashy than an outright acquisition, but potentially much smarter for long-term success. He pulled out his phone, making a few quick calculations. We could structure an exclusive licensing agreement for their monitoring technology, combined with a minority equity investment. It would secure the relationship without the full financial exposure of an acquisition. For the next hour, we refined the concept, identifying potential terms, advantages, and challenges. By the time we finished our coffee, we had outlined a proposal that felt true to Margaret's principles: innovative but not reckless, growth-oriented but not at the expense of the company's financial health. "This is good, Emma," Michael said as we prepared to leave. "Really good. But are you ready to present it to the board? Foster and his allies will push back. It's not the decisive move Robert was advocating." I thought about the board meeting, about Foster's dismissive attitude and the others' wary assessment. I thought about Margaret's confidence in me, expressed through both her journal and her final bequest. And I thought about who I was becoming, no longer just Robert's wife or Margaret's caretaker, but a woman reclaiming her own strength and vision. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm ready." Tom arranged an emergency board meeting for the following afternoon. As I prepared my presentation, I focused on creating a compelling case for the partnership approach, emphasizing both the strategic benefits and the reduced risk compared to an immediate full acquisition. Michael helped me anticipate potential objections and develop counterarguments, his industry knowledge proving invaluable. The board meeting itself was tense from the outset. Foster arrived late, his expression thunderous as he took his seat. Diana Chen seemed cautiously supportive, having reviewed my proposal in advance at my request. The other members maintained carefully neutral expressions, clearly waiting to see how the discussion would unfold. Tom opened the meeting by explaining the accelerated timeline, citing competitive pressures, without directly mentioning Robert's activities. Then he turned the floor over to me. Standing at the head of the conference table, I felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. Then I remembered Margaret's words about confidence and asked the right questions, and the nervousness subsided. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice," I began. "As Tom mentioned, circumstances have necessitated accelerating our decision regarding Peterson Medical Devices. After extensive review of the acquisition proposal and consultation with industry experts, including Michael Wilson, who joins us today, I'd like to present an alternative approach." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined our partnership strategy in detail, using clear data visuals and straightforward language. I acknowledged the potential benefits of a full acquisition while highlighting the substantial risks involved in moving too quickly. I emphasized how our proposed approach aligned with Wilson Manufacturing's historical values, innovation paired with prudent financial management. When I finished, the room was silent for several moments. Then Foster leaned forward, his expression dismissive. "This is precisely what I was concerned about," he said, looking around the table rather than at me directly. "Mrs. Wilson's inexperience leading to hesitation and half measures. We need decisive action to maintain our competitive edge, not cautious partnerships that delay our growth potential." Before I could respond, Diana Chen spoke up. "I actually see this as quite strategic," she said, her quiet voice carrying surprising authority. The proposed approach gives us access to Peterson's technology, which is the primary asset we're interested in, while allowing us to evaluate cultural fit before committing to full integration. From R&D's perspective, this timeline actually makes more sense for proper technology transfer. Foster scoffed. Of course R&D wants more time. Meanwhile, our competitors could swoop in. With what capital? Michael interrupted smoothly. I've reviewed the market landscape thoroughly. The only entities with both the financial resources and strategic interest to make a competing offer would be Meridian Medical or Halcyon Devices. Meridian just committed to a major facility expansion, and Halcyon is navigating a product recall. Neither is positioned to make a move on Peterson right now. His confident assessment, backed by specific industry knowledge, visibly impressed several board members. Foster, however, wasn't finished. And what about Robert Wilson's efforts to arrange independent financing for a bid? Are we simply ignoring that threat? So he knew about Robert's plans. The confirmation of their ongoing communication wasn't surprising, but it confirmed the importance of addressing the issue directly. We're not ignoring any potential competitive threats, I replied calmly. We're responding with a strategy that protects Wilson Manufacturing's interests without overextending our resources or rushing into a major financial commitment without proper due diligence. I turned to James Hartley, the CFO. James, from a financial perspective, how do the two approaches compare in terms of risk profile and potential return? It was a calculated move. Hartley was generally aligned with Foster, but he was also known for his financial conservatism. Put on the spot to provide an objective assessment, he would have to acknowledge the merits of our approach. Hartley cleared his throat. The partnership approach does reduce our immediate financial exposure significantly. The ROI timeline is extended, but the risk profile is much more favorable, particularly given current market volatility. From there, the discussion became more technical, with board members raising questions about implementation timelines, contract structures, and potential integration challenges. Michael and I addressed each concern methodically, demonstrating that our proposal wasn't born of hesitation, but of strategic thinking. By the time Tom called for a vote, the room's energy had shifted. The partnership approach passed 7-2, with only Foster and one external board member opposing. As the meeting concluded, several board members approached to congratulate me on a well-presented proposal. Diana Chen lingered after the others had departed. Margaret would have approved, she said quietly. She always valued substance over flash. Her words warmed me more than any of the other congratulations. Thank you. That means a great deal, coming from someone who knew her well. Diana smiled slightly. She talked about you often, especially in the last year or so. She said you had a gift for seeing the whole picture when others got lost in the details. With a small nod, she gathered her things and left. Tom approached as I was collecting my presentation materials. Impressive performance, he said. You've just established yourself as a force to be reckoned with. I laughed softly. I don't know about that. I just presented what I thought made the most sense for the company. Exactly. And you did it with confidence and clarity, despite Foster's best efforts to undermine you. He glanced toward the door where Michael was waiting. The Wilson siblings as a team. That's not something anyone anticipated, least of all Robert. As Michael and I walked to the parking lot together, I felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The board meeting had been a crucial test, not just of my business acumen, but of my ability to stand my ground in a hostile environment. For perhaps the first time since Robert had walked out, I felt not just that I would survive this massive life change, but that I might actually thrive. We make a good team, Michael said as we reached my car. Who would have thought? I smiled, thinking of Margaret's journal, her careful observations of her family's strengths and weaknesses. I think your mother might have suspected it all. along. The triumph of the Peterson partnership vote lingered like a pleasant afterglow in the days that followed. I found myself moving through Margaret's house, my house now, with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The phone calls from board members, the congratulatory email from Tom, Michael's proud smile, all confirmed that I had taken my first real step toward establishing myself as more than just an unexpected beneficiary of Margaret's generosity. I was hanging framed photos in my home office when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I spotted a delivery van parked at the curb. The delivery person handed me a large arrangement of white lilies and hydrangeas with a small envelope tucked among the blooms. I carried them to the kitchen, breathing in their delicate fragrance as I opened the card. Diana Chen told me about your success at the board meeting. Margaret would be so proud. Keep trusting your instincts. David Cooper. I smiled, touched by the attorney's thoughtfulness. In the weeks since the will reading, David had become an unexpected ally, checking in periodically to ensure I was navigating my new responsibilities successfully. Unlike some, he seemed genuinely pleased that Margaret had chosen me as her successor. As I arranged the flowers in a crystal vase that had been Margaret's favorite, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Dinner tonight to celebrate your corporate badassery? The Italian place on Maple, 7 p.m.? I texted back my acceptance, realizing, with surprise, that I was actually looking forward to an evening out. For so long, social engagements had felt like obligations, squeezed between caregiving duties and attempts to maintain my failing marriage. Now, they felt like opportunities, chances to reconnect with friends, to remember who I was beyond my responsibilities to others. The Italian restaurant was warm and inviting, its exposed brick walls and soft lighting creating an atmosphere of intimate comfort. Lisa was already at a corner table when I arrived, a bottle of Prosecco chilling beside her. There she is, she said, standing to embrace me. Wilson Manufacturing's new strategic genius. I laughed, settling into my chair. Hardly. I just presented an idea that made sense. And outmaneuvered your ex-husband's ally in the process. She poured the sparkling wine into 2 glasses, raising hers in a toast. To Emma Wilson, who's finally showing the world what I've always known, that she's a force to be reckoned with. I clinked my glass against hers, a pleasant warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the wine. It feels good, I admitted, making decisions based on what I think is right, not just trying to keep everyone else happy. Lisa nodded, studying me over the rim of her glass. You look different. Not just the hair, though that's fabulous. There's something else. You seem more present. I feel more present, I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. For years, I was always thinking ahead to the next task, the next crisis, the next need I had to meet. Now I'm actually experiencing my life as it happens. We ordered our meal, handmade ravioli for Lisa, grilled branzino for me, and fell into the comfortable rhythm of conversation that had sustained our friendship through college, careers, my marriage, her divorce, and countless life changes. As we lingered over tiramisu and espresso, Lisa brought up a subject I'd been avoiding. Have you heard anything more from Robert since the board meeting? I shook my head. Radio silence. Which is unusual for him. He doesn't typically accept defeat gracefully. You think he's planning something else? I considered the question, recalling Robert's pattern throughout our marriage. Robert doesn't give up easily, especially when his pride is involved. The Peterson partnership was a setback for him, but I doubt it's the end of whatever he's planning. Lisa's expression grew serious. Just be careful, Em. Men like Robert, men used to power and control, they don't handle losing well. I know, I assured her. I'm keeping my guard up. Walking home that evening, enjoying the mild spring air, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Just months ago, I'd been balancing Margaret's care with desperate attempts to save my crumbling marriage. Now I was finding my footing as a business owner while creating a new home for myself in Margaret's house. The following Monday brought a new challenge. Tom called early, his voice tense. "We have a situation developing with the Peterson partnership. Their CEO just called. He's received a competing offer and wants to discuss our response." My stomach tightened. "Robert?" "No, actually. Artemis Health Technologies. They're a major player, Emma. 10 times our size with international reach. They've apparently offered Peterson a full acquisition at 20% above our partnership valuation." I sank into my desk chair, processing this unexpected development. What's Peterson's position? Are they leaning toward the Artemis offer? Dr. Peterson, James Peterson, the founder and CEO, says he prefers our approach philosophically. He built his company specifically to advance cardiac monitoring technology, not to be absorbed into some corporate behemoth. But the financial differential is significant, and he has investors to consider. "So what are our options?" Tom sighed. "We could increase our financial offer, though matching Artemis dollar for dollar would strain our resources substantially. Or we could emphasize the non-financial benefits of our partnership: greater autonomy, shared research objectives, cultural alignment." I thought for a moment. Is there a third option? Could we bring in another partner to strengthen our position without overextending ourselves? There was a pause on the line. "That's actually an interesting approach. Let me make some calls and get back to you." In the meantime, Dr. Peterson has agreed to meet with us tomorrow morning to discuss our response. Can you be there? Absolutely. After ending the call, I immediately reached out to Michael, filling him in on the situation. He arrived at my house an hour later with his laptop and a folder of notes, ready to strategize. "Artemis is formidable," he confirmed, showing me their corporate profile. "They've been on an acquisition spree for the past 2 years, gobbling up smaller medical technology firms to expand their portfolio." "What happens to those smaller companies after acquisition?" I asked, scanning the impressive list of Artemis's recent purchases. Michael grimaced. "Typically, they're stripped for intellectual property and valuable talent, then gradually dismantled. Artemis has a reputation for promising autonomy to acquisition targets, then centralizing operations within months of closing the deal. That information gave me an idea. Do you think we could find someone from one of those acquired companies? Someone who could speak directly to Peterson about their experience?" Michael's eyes lit up. "Actually, yes. I know the former VP of research at Medisync. They were acquired by Artemis 18 months ago. Last I heard, he'd left the company after clashing with Artemis management over research priorities. I could reach out, see if he'd be willing to speak with us or Dr. Peterson." "Do it," I said decisively. "And let's look more closely at Peterson himself. Tom mentioned he built his company specifically to advance cardiac monitoring technology. What's his background? What motivates him beyond financial success?" We spent the next several hours researching James Peterson, his academic career at Stanford Medical School, his early patents, his published papers on improving cardiac care. Through technology, the picture that emerged was of a physician-scientist driven primarily by improving patient outcomes, someone who had entered the business world as a means to turn his innovations into widely available solutions. "He's not a typical CEO," Michael observed as we reviewed Peterson's TEDx talk on medical innovation. "Money seems secondary to his mission. That gives us an angle Artemis can't match, regardless of their financial offer." I nodded in agreement. "So our strategy for tomorrow is to emphasize mission alignment and the preservation of Peterson's research vision, while introducing the possibility of bringing in a third partner to strengthen our financial position." "Exactly. And if my contact from Medisync is willing to share his experience with Artemis, that could be powerful reinforcement." The next morning, Michael and I met Tom at Wilson Manufacturing's headquarters before driving together to Peterson Medical Devices. located in a modern office park about 40 miles from Oak Ridge. Michael's former colleague had agreed to join us, flying in from Chicago on short notice to share his Artemis experience directly with Dr. Peterson. The Peterson offices were impressive but understated, sleek. Glass and steel architecture housing state-of-the-art research labs and engineering facilities. Dr. Peterson himself greeted us in the lobby, a trim man in his 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind rimless glasses. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I've heard quite a bit about you in recent weeks. Your proposal for a strategic partnership, rather than an immediate acquisition, was refreshingly thoughtful in an industry that often prioritizes speed over sustainability." His direct acknowledgement of my role, rather than deferring to Tom as CEO, sent a clear message. He recognized me as the decision-maker in our group. I appreciated the respect implicit in that recognition. "Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Your technology is truly innovative. I believe our companies could accomplish remarkable things together, given the right structure and shared vision." He nodded, gesturing toward a conference room. "Shall we discuss what that might look like in light of recent developments?" The meeting lasted over 3 hours, evolving from a formal presentation into a collaborative discussion about possibilities. Dr. Peterson listened attentively as Michael's colleague described the post-acquisition dismantling of Medisync's research agenda, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I outlined our vision for a 3-way partnership that would preserve Peterson's autonomy while providing greater financial resources than our original proposal, his interest was evident. "The third partner you're suggesting," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Do you have someone specific in mind?" I exchanged glances with Tom and Michael. We had discussed several possibilities but hadn't committed to a specific partner yet. "We have several candidates under consideration," Tom replied. "But we wanted to ensure alignment with your priorities before proceeding with those discussions." Dr. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate that approach. My concern with Artemis isn't just their history of consolidating acquisitions, though that's certainly troubling. It's their fundamental business model, maximizing shareholder value above all else. I didn't spend 20 years developing this technology to see it priced beyond the reach of the patients who need it most." His words confirmed what our research had suggested, that financial considerations, while important, weren't his primary motivation. This gave us an opening that Artemis, for all its resources, couldn't match. "Dr. Peterson," I said, "what if our partnership agreement included specific commitments regarding pricing strategy and accessibility? Not just vague assertions, but contractual obligations that would survive any future ownership changes?" He looked at me with new interest. "That would be unusual in this industry, but tremendously appealing from my perspective. Can such provisions be effectively structured?" "They can," Michael confirmed. "I've worked on similar arrangements in cross-border medical technology transfers. With the right legal framework, we can ensure that the core mission of affordable access remains protected regardless of future business developments." By the time we concluded the meeting, we had outlined a framework for moving forward. Wilson Manufacturing and Peterson Medical Devices would form a joint research entity, with both companies maintaining operational independence while sharing technology and market access. We would seek a third partner, most likely an international medical technology firm interested in U.S. market expansion, to provide additional financial resources without threatening the core mission. Dr. Peterson would delay his response to Artemis until we could present a formalized version of this alternative, giving us 2 weeks to secure the third partner and draft detailed agreements. As we drove back to Oak Ridge, the atmosphere in the car was cautiously optimistic. "That went better than I expected," Tom admitted. "Peterson clearly prefers our approach on principle. If we can make the numbers work with a suitable third partner, I think we have a real chance of countering Artemis's offer." "I already have some ideas about potential partners," Michael said, scrolling through contacts on his phone. Nakamura Medical in Japan has been looking for U.S. distribution channels for their monitoring software, which would complement Peterson's hardware beautifully. I listened to their technical discussion, contributing occasionally but mostly observing the easy collaboration developing between them. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing these two intelligent men. One who had known me only as Robert's wife, the other as Robert's brother, now treating me as a valued colleague and strategic partner. When Tom dropped us off at my house, Michael lingered on the porch after the CEO had driven away. "You were impressive today," he said, his tone serious. The way you connected with Peterson on the mission aspect identified his core concern about patient access. That's what turned the conversation in our favor. I smiled, slightly embarrassed by the praise. I just paid attention to what seemed to matter most to him. Exactly. While everyone else is focusing on financial terms and technology integration, you saw the human element. He shook his head slightly. It's exactly what Mom would have done. The comparison to Margaret, spoken with genuine admiration rather than as an attempt to diminish my contribution, warmed me unexpectedly. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Michael and Tom led the discussions with potential third partners, eventually settling on Nakamura Medical as our best option. I focused on developing the structural framework of the partnership, emphasizing patient access and long-term research goals in ways that resonated with Dr. Peterson's vision. Throughout this period, Robert remained conspicuously absent from the business landscape. According to Tom, he had taken a consulting position with a firm in Boston, seemingly removing himself from the immediate vicinity of Wilson Manufacturing. I found his retreat suspicious. It was so unlike the Robert I knew to surrender a fight. But the demands of the Peterson negotiations left me little time to dwell on it. 3 days before our deadline to present the final partnership proposal to Dr. Peterson, I received an unexpected call from Diana Chen. "Emma, I hope I'm not interrupting, but there's something you should know. It may be nothing, but it struck me as odd." "What is it?" I asked, setting aside the contract draft I'd been reviewing. "William Foster has been meeting with department heads individually, asking unusual questions about our manufacturing processes, client relationships, proprietary techniques. He's framing it as preparation for a board strategy session, but these are details no board member has ever requested before." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Has he spoken with you?" "Yes, yesterday. He wanted detailed information about our research pipeline, development timeframes, patent statuses. I provided general overviews, nothing confidential, but his interest seemed targeted." I thanked Diana for the information, then immediately called Michael and Tom, arranging to meet at my house that evening. When I shared Diana's observations, their reactions confirmed my suspicions. "Corporate espionage," Tom said grimly. "It fits with Foster's recent behavior. He's been unusually quiet at meetings, withdrawn from discussions he would normally dominate." Michael nodded in agreement. "And now Roberts conveniently removed himself to Boston, establishing distance while Foster gathers inside information. The question is, who's the intended recipient? Artemis?" "That would make sense," I said slowly. "If Artemis acquired Peterson and then used inside information about Wilson Manufacturing to either compete against us more effectively or position for a hostile takeover." "It would be devastating," Tom finished. "We need to act quickly, but carefully. Accusing a board member of corporate espionage without solid evidence could create legal problems and destabilize the company." We spent the next hour outlining a strategic response. Tom would implement immediate information security protocols, restricting access to sensitive data and compartmentalizing research information. Michael would accelerate our discussions, with Nakamura Medical and Dr. Peterson, aiming to finalize our partnership before any competitive intelligence could be effectively utilized. and I would meet with David Cooper to discuss the legal options for addressing Foster's potential breach of fiduciary duty. The following morning, I sat in David's office, outlining the situation as we understood it. The attorney listened attentively, taking occasional notes but mostly absorbing the information with a thoughtful expression. Foster's actions, as described, certainly raise concerns, he said when I finished. But proving corporate espionage is notoriously difficult without catching someone in the act of transferring confidential information. What are our options then? I asked. We can't simply wait for him to cause irreparable harm to the company. David considered for a moment. We could take a two-pronged approach. First, immediate protective measures, which it sounds like Tom is already implementing. Second, a more proactive strategy. Create an opportunity to catch Foster in the act. You mean set a trap? In essence, yes. We could create a controlled scenario where Foster is provided with seemingly valuable but actually harmless confidential information. If that specific information subsequently appears in a competitor's actions, we'd have clear evidence of the leak. The approach made strategic sense, though the idea of deliberately misleading even a hostile board member gave me pause. Would that be legal? Ethical? David smiled slightly. Legal, certainly, as long as we're careful about how it's executed. Ethical? That's a more complex question. But consider the alternative, allowing someone to potentially damage a company that employs hundreds of people and creates life-saving medical components. Put that way, the decision became clearer. How would we implement this? Together we developed a plan. Tom would inform select senior leaders about a supposed breakthrough in our manufacturing process that would significantly reduce production costs for our cardiac components. This fictitious development would be shared in a confidential meeting, to which Foster would be invited as the board's operations liaison. The details would be specific and technical enough to be traceable if they appeared elsewhere. By the time I left David's office, I felt both more prepared and more unsettled. The corporate maneuvering, the deliberate strategy of disinformation, it was all so far removed from the life I'd led just months earlier. Yet I found myself thinking strategically, weighing risks and benefits with a clarity that surprised me. That evening, as I was reviewing the final partnership proposal for Dr. Peterson, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I was startled to see Robert standing on my porch, Margaret's porch, for the first time since her funeral. I hesitated before opening the door, reminding myself that this was my home now, my territory. When I finally pulled the door open, I was struck by how different Robert looked. Thinner, somehow less substantial than the man who had dominated my life for 18 years. "Emma," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "May I come in?" I think it's time we talked. Every instinct warned me to refuse, to maintain the separation that had brought such unexpected clarity to my life. But curiosity won out. What could possibly have brought Robert to my door after weeks of silence? Briefly, I agreed, stepping aside to let him enter. Robert paused in the foyer, his eyes taking in the subtle changes I'd made to Margaret's home. New curtains in the living room, my photographs on the mantel alongside Margaret's, fresh paint in the hallway. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly before he followed me into the kitchen. "Would you like something to drink?" I offered, more from ingrained habit than genuine hospitality. He shook his head. "No, thank you. I won't stay long." I leaned against the counter, deliberately not inviting him to sit. "What can I do for you, Robert?" He studied me for a moment, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the wife he'd left behind. "You look well," he said finally. "The new role seems to agree with you." "It does," I confirmed, waiting for him to get to the point. "I've been doing some thinking," he continued, "about everything that's happened. Mom's will, the company situation, our separation." The careful wording, separation, rather than divorce, caught my attention. He was choosing his words deliberately, setting a particular tone. "I may have reacted hastily," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "Leaving the company, leaving our marriage." It was a difficult time with Mom's death and the shock of the will reading. I wasn't thinking clearly. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was stunned by this apparent about-face. "What exactly are you saying, Robert?" He took a step closer, his voice softening. "I'm saying I made a mistake, Emma. Walking away from everything we built together, letting pride and hurt feelings drive my decisions. The past few weeks have given me perspective. Jennifer was a distraction, nothing more. What matters is family, legacy, the life we shared." The rehearsed quality of his words was unmistakable. This wasn't genuine remorse. This was strategy, carefully calculated to achieve some specific goal. "And the company?" I asked, watching his expression closely. "Are you also having second thoughts about resigning from Wilson Manufacturing?" A flicker of something, relief, eagerness, crossed his features before he controlled it. "I think my expertise could still be valuable there. We built that company together, in many ways. With the Peterson situation developing, my industry connections could be an asset." And there it was, the real reason for this unexpected visit. Not reconciliation, not genuine regret, but an attempt to regain access to the company at a critical moment in the Peterson negotiations. Whether he was working with Foster to gather information for Artemis or planning some other interference, his timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "That's quite a change of heart," I observed, keeping my tone mild despite the anger building within me. "Just weeks ago, you couldn't leave fast enough. Now suddenly you're interested in coming back, to our marriage, to the company, right when we're finalizing a major strategic partnership." His expression hardened slightly before he forced a smile. "I understand your skepticism. But people can realize their mistakes, Emma. I've had time to reflect on what really matters." "And Jennifer? What does she think of this newfound clarity?" Robert's smile didn't waver. "That's over. Has been for weeks. She was never who I thought she was." I remembered Jennifer's visit, her warning about Robert's plans to undermine the Peterson deal, her revelation that she had ended their relationship after seeing his true character. How quickly he rewrote history when it suited his purposes. "I appreciate your honesty," I said carefully. "But I need time to process this. It's all very sudden." He nodded, clearly interpreting my response as potential openness to his proposition. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be in town for the next few weeks, staying at the Oak Ridge Inn. We could have dinner sometime, talk more about possibilities." After he left, I stood in the kitchen for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. Robert's sudden appearance, his carefully crafted narrative of regret and redemption, his convenient desire to return to the company just as we neared completion of the Peterson partnership. It all pointed to a calculated attempt to disrupt our progress from within. I called Michael immediately, relating the entire conversation. His reaction was immediate and vehement. Classic Robert manipulation. He's trying to get back inside, either to sabotage the Peterson deal directly or to feed information to Artemis through Foster. "That's my assessment as well," I agreed. "The question is, how do we respond? Rejecting him outright might push him toward more aggressive tactics." Michael was quiet for a moment. "What if we appeared to consider his offer? Not actually bringing him back, but keeping him thinking we might while we finalize the Peterson partnership and address the Foster situation." The suggestion had merit. Keeping Robert occupied with false hope might prevent more direct interference with our plans. Yet the thought of pretending even temporary interest in reconciliation made my stomach turn. It felt too much like the patterns of our marriage, me accommodating, him manipulating. "I can't do it," I said finally. "I won't go back to playing those games, even strategically. There has to be another way." What about a partial truth? Michael suggested. Tell him you need to focus on finalizing the Peterson situation before considering any major personal decisions. It's honest, buys us time, and doesn't require you to feign interest in reconciliation. That approach felt more authentic. I can work with that. And in the meantime, we accelerate everything: the partnership finalization, the Foster investigation, securing the company's future before Robert can interfere further. The next morning, I texted Robert a carefully worded message, explaining that while I appreciated his reaching out, I needed to focus on the company's immediate needs before addressing personal matters. His response came quickly, understanding, patient, supportive. The perfect ex-husband reconsidering his mistakes. It was so perfectly calibrated to appear reasonable that it only confirmed my suspicions of his ulterior motives. With Robert temporarily handled, I threw myself into finalizing the Peterson partnership. Working closely with Tom, Michael, and our legal team, we completed the three-way agreement with Peterson Medical Devices and Nakamura Medical 2 days ahead of schedule. The final structure preserved the core mission of accessible cardiac monitoring technology while providing stronger financial backing than our original proposal, and maintaining each company's operational independence. When Dr. Peterson signed the agreement in Wilson Manufacturing's conference room, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. We had successfully countered Artemis's financial advantage with a more aligned vision and stronger commitment to the technology's intended purpose. More personally, I had helped create something positive and lasting, not just for Wilson Manufacturing, but for the patients who would ultimately benefit from these integrated medical technologies. Congratulations, Emma, Dr. Peterson said, shaking my hand warmly after the signing ceremony. Margaret chose her successor wisely. His words, spoken with genuine respect, affected me more deeply than I had expected. For so long, I had defined myself in relation to others, Robert's wife, Margaret's caretaker. Now I was being recognized for my own contributions, my own vision and leadership. As the executive team celebrated the successful partnership, I found myself standing slightly apart, watching the interactions with a new perspective. These people, Tom with his steady leadership, Diana with her brilliant technical mind, even the more junior employees who had worked on various aspects of the deal, they were no longer just colleagues in a company I had unexpectedly inherited. They were partners in something meaningful, something I was actively helping to build. The path ahead still held challenges, addressing Foster's apparent corporate espionage, navigating Robert's renewed interest in the company, integrating the new partnership effectively. But for the first time, I faced these challenges not as overwhelming obstacles but as problems to be solved with intelligence and determination. Margaret's journal entry came back to me. The greatest mistake we make is believing we have infinite time to become the person we're meant to be. In losing everything I had built my identity around, my marriage, my role as caretaker, I had found my way back to myself, to the woman Margaret had seen all along. Not just a wife, not just a caretaker, but a person of substance and capability, ready to face whatever came next with clear eyes and newfound strength. The trap we set for William Foster sprung more quickly than any of us anticipated. 3 days after our confidential meeting about the fictitious manufacturing breakthrough, Diana Chen received a curious email from an Artemis Health Technologies representative inquiring about licensing opportunities for our new low-friction coating process, the exact terminology we had fabricated for our trap. Tom called an emergency executive meeting in a secure conference room, with increased security protocols that included leaving all electronic devices outside. Present were only those I now considered my inner circle: Tom, Michael, Diana, David, Cooper, and myself. "We have confirmation," Tom announced grimly, displaying printouts of the email exchange. "The specific technical details we created have appeared word for word in Artemis's inquiry. There's no way they could have that information unless someone from our confidential meeting shared it directly. And the only people at that meeting were the 5 of us, Foster and Dr. Reeves from engineering, Diana added. David Cooper nodded, thoughtfully. This is precisely the evidence we needed. The question now is how to proceed. We could involve law enforcement immediately, but that creates public exposure that might damage company reputation and stock value. I considered our options carefully. What if we use this to neutralize both threats simultaneously? Foster and Robert. All eyes turned to me expectantly. We know Robert is attempting to reposition himself close to the company. We also know Foster has been feeding information to Artemis. What if we let Robert believe we're considering his return in a consultant capacity, but with a specific focus on reviewing board governance and information security? Michael caught on immediately. We tell him we've had concerns about information leaks but don't know the source. Ask him to help review our protocols since he knows the company so well. Exactly, I confirmed. Robert's ego won't let him pass up the opportunity to appear indispensable. And if Foster realizes Robert is investigating security breaches, Foster will panic, Tom finished, a slow smile spreading across his face. He'll either approach Robert to warn him off or accelerate his information gathering before his access is cut. Either way, we monitor both of them closely and catch them in the act of either collusion or individual corporate espionage, Diana added. David raised a cautionary hand. This approach has merit, but we need to ensure all surveillance and monitoring is legally conducted. I'd suggest bringing in a specialized legal team with expertise in corporate espionage cases. The plan took shape over the next hour, with David outlining the legal parameters while Tom and Diana worked out the technical details of monitoring Foster's company communications without violating privacy laws. Michael volunteered to be the one to approach Robert with our consulting offer, arguing that the strained relationship between the brothers would make Robert less suspicious of a setup. 2 days later, Robert accepted our carefully crafted consulting offer with poorly disguised eagerness. Michael reported that he had taken the bait completely, visibly pleased by what he perceived as a path back into the company's inner workings. He asked specifically about the Peterson partnership and our ongoing projects with them, Michael told me over coffee at my kitchen table. I gave him the general information that's already public, but hinted that there were exciting developments he'd be briefed on once his consultant agreement was finalized. I nodded, picturing Robert's reaction, the calculated restraint hiding intense interest. I knew him so well, even now. And the security review aspect? He didn't bat an eye. Said he'd always had concerns about our information protection protocols, especially with certain board members who didn't understand modern cybersecurity threats, as if he's some kind of tech expert. Michael rolled his eyes. The consultant agreement gives him just enough access to feel important without providing any actual sensitive information. The wait was excruciating. For 10 days, we maintained the facade. Robert attending limited meetings, reviewing sanitized documents, making recommendations that went nowhere. Foster continued his board duties, apparently unaware that his communications were being monitored within legal boundaries established by David's team. Then, on the 11th day, the connection we'd been waiting for materialized. Foster sent an encrypted email from his personal account to an address associated with Artemis's chief strategy officer. Our cybersecurity team, operating under strict legal protocols, flagged the communication pattern without accessing the content. More damning was what happened next. Foster used his company keycard to access the Research and Development Secure Server Room at 9:47 p.m., long after normal business hours, and downloaded files related to our Peterson integration plans. The following morning, Robert requested a private meeting with me to discuss some concerns about information security. David Cooper joined us, at my insistence, in my office at Wilson Manufacturing headquarters. Emma, I've discovered something troubling, Robert began, his expression grave with manufactured concern. I believe William Foster has been accessing and potentially sharing confidential company information with outside parties. I maintained a neutral expression. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Robert produced a folder containing printed server access logs, the very logs our security team had flagged the previous evening. These show Foster accessing R&D servers at unusual hours, downloading sensitive files related to the Peterson partnership. I took the liberty of reviewing recent access patterns as part of my security assessment. I see, I said calmly. And how did you obtain these logs, Robert? They're restricted to the cybersecurity team and executive management. He hesitated briefly. I have connections in IT from my previous role. I asked for a favor, off the record. Given the circumstances, I felt it was justified. David Cooper leaned forward slightly. Mr. Wilson, are you suggesting you circumvented official channels to conduct unauthorized surveillance of a board member? Robert's composure faltered momentarily before he regained control. Not surveillance. I was following leads based on concerns several employees had expressed to me confidentially. Interesting, I replied, because our authorized security team flagged this same activity yesterday evening and has been monitoring similar patterns for over a week now, all through proper legal channels with documented authorization. The color drained from Robert's face. I don't understand. I think you do, I countered, my voice steady. You and Foster have been working together, Robert. He provides inside information, which you then pass to Artemis while maintaining plausible deniability. The consulting role was your attempt to regain access after Foster's activities raised suspicions. That's absurd, he protested, but the confidence had vanished from his voice. I came to you the moment I discovered Foster's breach. Why would I do that if we were working together? David Cooper slid a document across the table. This is a record of a meeting between you and Gregory Simmons, Artemis's chief strategy officer, at the Westfield Hotel in Boston, 3 days before you approached Emma about reconciliation and returning to the company. Would you like to explain that coincidence? Robert stared at the document, visibly calculating his options. It was a social meeting. Greg and I know each other from industry events. Robert, I said quietly, it's over. We have Foster's, communications, the server access logs, your meeting with Artemis, and the traced leak of our fabricated manufacturing breakthrough. The board is meeting this afternoon to remove Foster. The only question now is whether you'll face legal consequences alongside him. For a moment, I glimpsed the real Robert beneath the controlled exterior. Angry, cornered, dangerously wounded, in his pride. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the flash of raw emotion was replaced by calculated pragmatism. What do you want? He asked, his voice low. A complete severance of all ties, I stated. You sign a legal agreement relinquishing any future claims against Wilson Manufacturing or its partnerships. You stay away from the company, its employees, and its business interests permanently. In exchange, we don't pursue industrial espionage charges. And Foster? That's not your concern anymore. The board meeting that afternoon was tense but decisive. Presented with irrefutable evidence of his breaches of fiduciary duty, Foster resigned rather than face public removal and potential legal action. A carefully worded press release cited personal reasons for his departure, maintaining the company's public reputation while sending a clear message internally about the consequences of disloyalty. Robert signed the legal agreement David had prepared, effectively cutting all ties with Wilson Manufacturing forever. Our divorce proceedings, which had been moving slowly through initial filings, accelerated with his sudden eagerness to finalize our separation. Within weeks, 18 years of marriage was legally dissolved with surprisingly little fanfare, just signatures on documents and a division of assets that felt like closing the books on a business arrangement rather than a life partnership. 6 months after Margaret's death, Wilson Manufacturing celebrated the first successful product launch from our partnership with Peterson Medical Devices and Nakamura Medical, an integrated cardiac monitoring system combining Peterson's hardware, Nakamura's software, and our precision components. Early clinical results showed promising improvements in patient outcomes, particularly for remote monitoring of rural patients with limited access to specialized cardiac care. At the launch celebration, held in the company's newly renovated atrium, I found myself surrounded by people who had become not just colleagues but friends. Tom with his steady leadership, Diana with her brilliant innovations, Michael who had discovered unexpected fulfillment in his role, bridging family legacy and future vision. Dr. Peterson raised a glass in my direction from across the room, a gesture of respect between partners who had chosen a path of collaboration over corporate consolidation. The company was thriving, its stock value higher than ever, its reputation for innovation and integrity intact, despite Robert and Foster's attempts to undermine it. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I slipped away to Margaret's, my, garden, behind the house that had become truly home. The autumn air was crisp, the flower beds prepared for winter's rest under Michael's surprisingly knowledgeable guidance. He had taken to visiting regularly, helping me maintain the extensive gardens his mother had loved, sharing stories of their family history I'd never heard during my marriage. Sitting on the stone bench Margaret had installed decades earlier, I opened her journal to one of the final entries, written just weeks before her death. I watch Emma tending my orchids with the same care she shows me, and I see in her what perhaps she cannot yet see in herself, a remarkable capacity for growth, for resilience, for becoming more fully herself even when circumstances try to diminish her. Robert calls her dependable, as if it's a small virtue. He does not understand that her steadfastness is not a limitation, but a strength, a foundation upon which great things can be built when the time is right. I believe her time is coming. I closed the journal, breathing in the garden's earthy scent as twilight settled around me. Margaret had been right. My time had come, though not in any way either of us could have imagined. In losing what I thought defined me, my marriage, my role as caretaker, I had found something far more valuable myself. The company would continue to evolve under my guidance. The partnerships we'd formed creating innovations that helped patients far beyond Oak Ridge. My work at the community center's physical therapy program brought weekly satisfaction in helping others regain their strength and independence. My friendship with Lisa had deepened through our weekly dinners and occasional weekend trips to nearby cities. My unexpected bond with Michael continued to grow, bringing healing to us both. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, I thought about the strange, circuitous path that had led me here. Robert's betrayal had felt like an ending, the collapse of everything I'd built my life around. Instead, it had been a beginning. Painful and disorienting, yes, but a beginning nonetheless. Margaret's final gift hadn't been the money or the company or the house. It had been the opportunity to discover who I could become when I finally put myself first. I rose from the bench, brushing fallen leaves from my skirt, and headed inside, to the warmth of the home that was now truly mine, filled with both memories of the past and possibilities for the future. Whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I was more than capable, not just of surviving, but of thriving on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.